Welcome to the Rethinking Humanity podcast, where we dive deeper into what makes us human and what causes us to thrive. I'm Lacey Delane.
I'm Sonya Larrea.
And we are so excited to be joining you guys a little earlier than normal on a Wednesday for episode 38. It is, how does capitalism affect the way we do life? I'm excited about this one. Sonya, looks like you're not joining us from home this time.
No, I'm traveling and I couldn't find a spot. So I'm actually in the gym of this hotel because in the lobby, first of all, my room is no AC. They're trying to fix it. And then the lobby is super loud, like with music. This is the least distracting area. So you can see I'm in a gym.
You know what? Round of applause for you. That's called commitment. Thank you. Literally, if you're watching us on YouTube right now, you can see the treadmill in the background, some towel things.
Yep.
So thank you, Sonya, for your dedication. And I know how hard it is when you're traveling sometimes to make everything happen. So appreciate you very, very much. Yeah.
No problem. I'm here.
Cool. Well, before we get into it, we want to thank a couple people who bought us coffees this week. One of those folks bought a coffee for both of us, and that is Tim Whitney. Thank you, Tim.
That's very sweet.
Yes, very, very sweet. And Courtney also bought me a coffee. Thank you, Courtney. Appreciate it very much. She's helped us a lot with our color scheme and logo and design and all that fun stuff. So we really appreciate her. And lastly, just want to say to all of you, invite you to follow us on Instagram. We're at Rethinking Humanity. Check out our website. And of course, if you're watching on YouTube. Yes, exactly. Sonya, you shared a really powerful article with me this week from the New York Times. It's an opinion article.
Yes. The article is What We Are Not Teaching Boys About Being Human. And it's really cool because I think we all know how we tend to, we tend to put our boys and girls in these stereotypes, gender stereotypes. And, I know, and I'm a big feminist, by the way, but at the same time, we can't forget about the boys because that's what creates, a lot of our issues too, is how we're giving them a narrow view of how they should be.
Yeah.
And we need, men that are vulnerable and men that can talk about their emotions. And I know you believe in that, Lacey.
Oh, yeah. 100% I do. I think it's amazing. I read this earlier this week and I reread it just a little while ago. And it was very interesting to me as a nanny and someone who works professionally with children. Mm-hmm. I was thinking about how different really the toys, the books, the things that we put in front of kids, and not even we necessarily as caregivers, but the things that are available to us as caregivers, parents, what have you, for children, and specifically for each sex or, for the specific genders. Mm-hmm. And, she says in this article about, her raising the boys, and she went from one phase of trucks and, mm-hmm. Cars to the next one, which is all about superheroes and saving the day. And there wasn't a lot of room for the nuance of human connection and vulnerability. And, it's just like this all or nothing, win or lose kind of thing.
Right. She gives a good example, and I read the book, but it was obviously a long time ago, Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Oh, yeah.
That sold like 250 million copies. But she says, that her sons and their friends gobbled up the books because they were hungry for something that reflected their own lives. Mm. And I think that's pretty powerful.
Well, I can reflect too on, working with kids. I've worked in my time nannying, I've worked a lot more with girls than I have with boys, but I have worked with some boys, and it is very clear to me that is the narrative. That's what's coming out of their mouths. Like, I'm going to save the day, and, we're going to fight, and we're going to win, and, whatever. And I think it's interesting, too, because literally what you can buy, what you think, or what's available for you to buy as a toy for a boy, and same with literature, right? For a boy or for girls are two totally different things. And I didn't think about it that much until just rereading this article. It's very, very true.
Right. She talks about the emotional life. This was really interesting to me, is how girls are kind of set up to like be thinking about feelings and like, the whole click thing. And boys don't get that message. It's not people focused. And so what she says is that story by story, girls are getting the message that other people's feelings are their concern and their responsibility. Boys are learning that these things have nothing to do with them.
Yeah.
And that's a statement that, sat with me. I mean, that's sad, that you've got this responsibility that you're giving the girls, and the boys are like, oh yeah, I guess I'm not part of this story.
Right. Or just the awareness of someone else's emotions and feelings. I think that is something that we tend to curate in girls, but we tend to ignore it, in boys. Right. And so this is a very, very enlightening article for all of us to think about kind of how we're approaching, raising our kids. This is such a powerful piece. I actually highlighted this and sent it to you. She says, probably because of this difference in socialization, boys score lower than girls of the same age on virtually all measures of empathy and social skills, a gap that grows throughout childhood and adolescence. This has implications across the board. Among first graders, social emotional ability, including the skills to form and maintain friendships, is a greater predictor of academic success than either family background or cognitive skills.
Yeah.
That's huge.
I remember that part too.
That's huge. And I will tell you, as someone who's used to work in public education, there's not a whole lot that's stronger of a predictor of success in school and ability to learn to read, ability to gain skills. Sadly, this is true than poverty levels. Like, more further into poverty you are, the harder that is. And so I would say this is just as big of a newsflash here. Like, as much as you are able to form and maintain friendships, that is the greatest predictor of academic success. We aren't arming our boys for that. And who loses at the end? All of us.
We all do. Yeah.
We all do. But also particularly women, because we like to talk to men who are self-aware and, emotionally.
Right. And then you try to have relationships and then families. So it just perpetuates.
Yes. It's amazing. Let's see. We've normalized a kind of workaday subtoxic masculinity, which is as much about what we don't expose boys to as what we do. So anyway, it's super interesting. And I think, my personal takeaway with this is, in my work with children, I think I'll make more of an effort to not categorize stories or toys as particularly boy toys and girl toys. But, try to bring, and in fact, try to swap,
right. And be neutral, whatever they gravitate towards. Right.
Yes. But no, this was really, really good. She starts out by saying, a while back at the bookstore with my 3 sons, I started flicking through a kid's magazine that had the kind of hyper pink sparkly cover that screams, boys, even glancing in this direction will threaten your masculinity. That's so funny.
That was funny. Yeah.
So yeah, super good. And this is a theme I think it's kind of been coming up in both of our lives and in the stuff that we've been reading lately, about men's mental health, basically.
Yeah. And also you can plug that you've been doing the thing on Clubhouse with men's mental health.
Right. We've been doing the Rethinking Humanity Men's Mental Health Hour on Mondays and Wednesdays at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. So if you're on Clubhouse, we'd love to have you join us. And it's something that I can sort of host, but there are other 2 males in there too. So it's open to everybody, but it's mostly about this issue right here, men needing spaces to share, knowing it's okay to share, knowing it's not anti-masculine to be in touch with your feelings,
Sure. That's important.
Yes. Super important. So cool. Well, that was what we wanted to share with you from news this week. we are shifting into a section from Eric Fromm's writing about how humans, man, he uses the phrase man as in like humans, how we are in capitalistic society. That's kind of how we got our title. How does capitalism affect how we do life, the way we do life? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And I think there's some really good stuff in here, Sonya. I was like, oh my God. There's one thing I highlighted. I'm like, I'm going to have to read that. So,
okay.
Yeah. So anything you want to stay before? I think I might start by reading a little bit of this first paragraph.
Yeah, go ahead and read and I'll jump in.
Okay, cool. So he says, mental health cannot be discussed meaningfully as an abstract quality of abstract people. If we are to discuss now the state of mental health in a contemporary Western man, we have to study the influence of the specific conditions of our mode of production and of our social and political organization. We have to arrive at a picture of the personality of the average man living and working under these conditions. Only if we can arrive at such a picture of what he calls the social character,
right,
that's when we have a basis to judge the mental health and sanity of modern society and the society of modern man.
Yeah, I think it's important for anybody listening for us to define what Fromm means by the social character.
Yes.
And what he's saying, the social character is the nucleus of the character structure, which is shared by most members of the same culture. So that's something that you share. In contradistinction to the individual character, in which people belonging to the same culture differ from each other. That's a real a difference that he points out that's very important. So I look at that as, okay, it's what we share in the same culture as opposed to the individual character.
Yeah,
that we would have being in the same culture, but we'd have an individual character.
Right. It's less about what really, like, the minor differences and more about the major similarities that we all carry in the same society, in the same culture. He says each society is structuralized and operates in certain ways which are necessitated by a number of different objective conditions, which include methods of production and distribution, which in turn depend on raw materials, industrial techniques, climate, size of population, those types of things. Why is this that important, though? Well, the mode of production really now is the means by which we all are able to take care of ourselves, to really just survive. And at the end of the day, as human beings, our number one priority is to survive. Now, compared to how we lived previously in hunter-gatherer societies, there wasn't a lot of, energy put towards production and consumption because we just, there's some nuts. Let's eat them. Great.
And we share them.
Right. But now society is a lot different.
Right.
And this actually impacts us a lot because it's completely connected to to our survival. How do we survive?
Right. I thought it was interesting how he says there's no society in general, but there's only specific social structures. And he goes on to say that the members of the society or the various classes or status groups within it have to behave in such a way as to be able to function in the sense required by the social system. Something that I've always thought about, that we need to want to act as if we have to act. And I've thought about that when I've talked to you about, well, what if you want to be different? In our society, it's hard because you're molded into having to be this way along with everyone else, going back to your point about survival. So we're all kind of in the same boat. So how do you break out of that? If you break out of that, you're going to be the only one standing there, pretty much. The way our society is structured right now.
Yeah, I love this. And I mean, he also says in here that the point of the social character is to really mold and channel the human energy within the society,
yes,
for the purpose of the continued functioning of the society. So that's what part of the role of the social character is for, because like the society needs to continue. And so it has to do whatever it has to do for the, this is kind of judgmental, but for the good or the bad, right? To get them to want to act the way that they have to act. And so this was quite enlightening to think about this and read what's on the next page, because it was like blew me away. I was like, oh, so that's why society is not set up to empower us to, be ourselves and think critically. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's an excellent point. We have to be molded into someone who's eager to do these things, right? And then if you look at modern industrial society, I mean, you have to have a system that you got to get up early, you got to go to work, you got to be productive. Right. So it's creating that environment that, you're thinking that you want to do that when really I don't know that we want to do that, but we've got a system that is making us believe that we want to do that.
Yes. I love this. He says it is a function of the social character to shape the energies of the members of society in such a way that their behavior is not a matter of conscious decision as to whether or not to follow the social pattern. Well, damn, no wonder it's so hard to get in touch with our authentic selves and know what we really want to do. We've not been trained that way, have we? But more of wanting to act as they have to act. And this is so interesting. He goes on to say that modern industrial society, for instance, could not have attained its ends. So we couldn't be where we are today if it had not harnessed the energy of free men for work and in a unprecedented degree. I want to read the next part, but if you want to throw something in there, go ahead.
No, go. Yeah.
Okay, man had to be molded. This is what made me go, oh my God, earlier, into a person who was eager to spend most of his energy for the purpose of work. Who acquired discipline, particularly orderliness and punctuality to a degree unknown in most other cultures. Yeah, I don't think hunter-gatherers push themselves this hard.
No. I mean, I think it's really created in us. I mean, I can say for myself, yeah, it's part of like kind of almost innate. Like we've been in this society that pushes you to be this way, right? So when you not being that way, then you're like, well, then how can I be? Because everything around you is that way, right? With the things about punctuality, orderliness, discipline, we know,
right.
That's sort of like mantras in our society.
And it's something that listeners, if you've been listening for a while since we started, it was a struggle I think Sonya and I both had for a little while. I know I definitely had it right at the beginning of the pandemic because I was unemployed, had just come on the campaign trail, and I'm like, who am I? Like, I don't have a job. Like, I don't think I'm valuable. And that tells you right there, molded into a person who is eager to spend most of his energy for the purpose of work.
Yeah.
There you go. I don't know many people. I'm becoming one of them. But I don't know many people who are not eager to spend most of their energy for the purpose of work. Do you?
No.
And people look at you funny because
they're
like,
absolutely.
You want to spend all your energy on work? Why?
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, go ahead.
No. Super good. I learned something though in this chapter because, we were talking about how the survival thing, the economics of survival, and that's important. But Fromm also goes on to say that it's not just our economics that drive us, that we have other motivating forces within us that we need to, it's not just the task of survival is what he's saying, that there's more, it's not just the physiological, but your psychic.
Yes.
It is we also need to look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, I think this is what you're touching on. The two poles that mold character is this kind of what you're talking about. Where he says, we speak only of one pole in the interconnection between social organization and man. And speaking of the socioeconomic structure, the other pole is man's nature, his psychic needs, right? Molding in turn the social conditions in which he lives. So he talks about we have the socioeconomic structure, which is a strong indicator, influencer, controller even of man's social character. And then we also have man's nature, which is a part of that as well. I would say, based on my experience within our society, not as strong as the socioeconomic, but certainly present. One can't ignore that it's present.
Yeah, I mean, and the part that was interesting is that he's saying we're not like blank sheets of paper. That also the need to strive for happiness and harmony, love and freedom are also inherent in our nature.
Yeah.
That was very, very interesting. When
Yeah.
we think about what, how are we moving forward as a species?
Right. And he says, talking about like examining the interaction between our human nature, right, and the nature of the external conditions under which we live. So I think we have to take both of those things into consideration as we're thinking about who we are and who we are as a social group. And I think right now we don't even consider the physiological, the human nature. We just think about our socioeconomic,
Right. No, that's a good point. I think the other part that he touches upon here is that the character structure is molded by the role which the individual has to play in his culture, contradicted by the assumption that a person's character is molded in his childhood. He's asking that question.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty interesting, because I thought it was fascinating, because the fact is your childhood is affected obviously by your, family, but your family is coming from the culture.
Right.
Whatever the culture has taught the family, they're going to teach you that as a child.
I love that. And you simplified it really well, because he just starts that section by saying, well, wait a minute. Is it the society that, impacts children and people and how they develop, or is it the family? Well, it's easily both, because as if the parents are not affected by society and culture of society, culture within society, and that doesn't play a role in the way that they raise and train their kids. Of course it does. I mean, think about the books, what we talked about earlier, like with the trucks, with boys, and the different stories with boys who really are not involved in a lot of emotional relationships, right?
Yeah, and there's this paragraph, I'm going to read it because it's so good. In addition to the character of the parents, the methods of childhood training, which are customary in a culture, also have the function of molding the character of the child in a socially desirable direction.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting is I don't think people realize, like imagine a neighborhood and, because you do the nanny thing and the mothers are talking, oh, you do this, I do this, like everybody's doing the same thing. And you're getting validated by what you're doing, even if what you're doing isn't good, right? Because everybody around you, and you're wanting to fit into your social environment, you want to be accepted. So I guess if, this woman's doing it and this father's doing it, it's again, the society telling us how to do what we really don't have a manual.
Right.
We don't have a manual to do that, So I just think it's interesting how much I'd never thought about that the social character of society is really influencing. I mean, he's super smart. We know that.
That's a good point, Sonya. Like, that's so good about how much what other people are doing impact and put pressure, I think, on parents and us as a society. It's especially because there's not a rule book, how to do it. It makes me wonder if this is part of why Erich Fromm didn't have kids, which we talked a little bit about Erich Fromm's biography in the last episode, and it is something that I wanted to know, because I was like, damn, I want to date somebody like him. Is his kid like him? And of course, he doesn't have no kids, so that's a sad thing. But I think this is another reason why, to be honest with you, I think I personally would have a really hard time having kids in this society, because I'm going to have to train them in the way that they can function well in this society. And I got to be honest, I don't know if I really want to do that,
Right. I hear you. Ugh. I think not knowing, but I think this is my guess, and not knowing, we read a lot about his biography. I think he contributed to the world. He was able to really give of himself. Like, he left his home country. He had more than one marriage. He learned about loving, where he wrote The Art of Loving. Yeah. So one would have to think if he had children, unfortunately, this is our society, then he would not maybe have had the energy or as much been able to give as much. I don't know. Just throwing that out there because, it would have been a different experience. Not saying that he wouldn't have written books and been able to contribute, but it would have been different. And we don't know the personal story. Maybe the women he was with weren't able to have children, or maybe I don't know the whole story there,
Right.
I just know that he, I think with all his experiences, was able to show us a lot of insight into, psychology, sociology, the world. Yeah.
I love that idea that, he really was able to contribute even more to us than he would have been able to, likely, if he had had kids.
Yeah, maybe.
That's an interesting thought, and I think it's likely true. But I do think that there's a really good point here. The function of molding the character of the child in a socially desirable direction. Yeah, that can be stressful, I think, for parents. Well, I think it would be stressful for me.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of keeping up with the Joneses kind of,
Right. And he talks about, is this what's desirable and necessary in any given culture? Because obviously the idea parents want is that their children to succeed, whatever that is. It's a very subjective word, but that's kind of what you hear. And so if you're in a culture that's saying you have to acquire, you have to, as we know, we're in this acquisitive culture, you have to go to the best school, you have to get the best job, you have to get stuff. So that's going to be a message a child learns really early on, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely am not a fan of like even the word.
Sorry about that.
No worries. The word child training, like I hate that because I've been in education, right? And for a while, years ago, I would have thought, we need to train children. And I'm like, no, I need to like garner a child's, sense of self and their curiosity and their intellect and their love of learning. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's totally.
Yeah. And ideally you'd want to foster in each child what they bring, whatever those gifts are, because we know every person is different.
Right.
But unfortunately that doesn't always happen.
Well, and we're talking about why. Because you can't, because society says, this is a free man who needs to work. He needs to be, his energy needs to be harnessed for work so he can survive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it just doesn't work like that. All right. So the last little section we're going to talk about is where he begins to talk about the structure of capitalism and the character of man. And he goes into, he's kind of take some of the history of capitalism here, which is very interesting. And he starts out with 17th and 18th century capitalism. So that's what we're going to talk about now. I just want to make sure this last part isn't something that I want to mention before we jump to that. The socioeconomic conditions of modern industrial society, which create personality of modern Western man, are responsible for the disturbances in his mental health. Required understanding of those elements specific to capitalistic mode of production of an acquisitive society in an industrial age. Okay, so he's just saying we need to examine the conditions because they do impact our mental health, the conditions of our socioeconomic structure, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I learned something too when he starts getting into the 17th and 18th century capitalism. He actually lists the features of what those are. But what is so interesting is how this whole idea, well, actually he goes back, I'll tell you, that he explains that technique and industry were in the beginning compared with the development in the 19th and 20th centuries. And second, that at the same time, the practices and ideas of medieval culture, which that was new to me, still had a considerable influence on the economic practices of this period. Well, he's going to explain that. I'll explain it more simply for the audience. Yeah. So when we think about, buyers and sellers, a lot of times a person's trying to get the cheapest price, so that they can turn around, the supplier, they're bartering so that they can turn around and sell it, for a higher price. But what happens when you have one group or one company do that and you have others They can't play in that field. Then this one guy who kind of screws everybody else out of it by, he has more production, makes it unfair. In cultures past, like in the medieval, you weren't supposed to do that. That was really looked at as a covetous man, meaning you're trying to get more of your share. And that was interesting because that's something that today we'd say, oh, good for him. He's able to get it at a cheaper price and turn around and sell it higher. But that wasn't a norm in medieval times. So I found that was interesting. This underselling practice is grown to such a shameful height that particular persons publicly advertise that they undersell the rest of the trade. He takes language right out of the 17th.
It's amazing, right?
1731, yeah.
I love this point. I want to say hey to Chris Alexander. I saw your message.
I saw that. Hey, Chris.
Yeah. It's interesting because in 17th and 18th century capitalism, it was a no-no. You don't do that. If you do that, i.e., basically making your clothing or your item a little bit cheaper and cutting out the middleman, you're damaging your community of businesses more than you are really gaining.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's really like a shitty thing to do.
It was supposed to be unchristian and unethical for one merchant to try to lure customers from another by force of lower prices or any other inducements.
There you go.
There you go. Because that says it well.
So capitalism started out, it sounds like, Sonya, on a pretty decent with some boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
Not unfettered, like winner take all, blah 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 blah.
Right.
Kind of thing.
No, that's true, and I didn't have that history, so it's interesting to see how the evolution is going to come when we're going to go through the centuries here. We're starting with the 17th and 18th. I know we'll get to the 19th eventually.
Mm-hmm. He says in the 5th edition of the Complete English Tradesman from 1745, it is stated that since the death of the author Defoe in 1731, oh, did you read this already? This underselling practice has grown to such a shameful height that particular persons publicly advertise that they undersell the rest of the trade. I mean, that was not cool. And he says the Complete English Tradesman, 5th edition, cites a concrete case in which an, quote, overgrown tradesman who had more money than his competitors and thus not forced to use credit, bought his wares directly from the producer, transported them himself instead of through a middleman, sold them directly to the retailer, enabling the latter to sell the materials for one
penny cheaper
per yard. So it was really, really shitty, So I think that it's interesting, too, that you touched on the features of capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
Touch on that really quick. The existence of politically, legally free men. You got to have that in order to have capitalism. And you have to have the fact that free men sell their labor to the owner of capital on the labor market and by contract. And then you need the existence of the commodity market as a mechanism by which prices are determined. And you need the principle that each individual acts with the aim of seeking profit for himself. Now, you may not blink an eye at this last one, but it's a big part of a value system that we hold within a capitalistic society. And I think we'll see once we start talking about 19th century capitalism, is that becomes more important than the whole. And the good of the whole.
Right. And I think this other part is really interesting that he says during this century that the most important was the principle that society and economy exist for man, not man for them. And so no economic progress was supposed to be healthy if it hurt any group within society. We don't do that today. So that I thought was interesting.
Yes.
It just tells you that the social balance had to be preserved. And I would say that now it's winner take all.
It's winner take all now. And it's not about profit at all costs. Who cares who gets hurt? Whatever. There was a care for the community within the context of capitalism. To me, I think that's okay. That's cool. That's the kind of capitalism I can.
Yeah, I think what you meant to say, Lacey, or I was saying now it's winner take all.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. But then the way you said it, you explained it. Yeah.
Okay, my
Just
apologies.
to clarify. No, all good.
So then it was in a way that like they cared about anything. They cared about things other than just their bottom line and their profit and them becoming rich. And they judged people pretty harshly if that was their goal and they didn't care about the good of the whole. So,
yes.
Yeah, I think it's very refreshing to hear that was the case at some point in some ways, because it's nice to know that it hasn't always been, very
right.
like winner take all kind of thing.
Right. I was going to say, I'm not trying to idolize certain centuries of our history, but what I think is good for the listeners is to see how we've evolved with how capitalism, began, and then where we've taken it to the extreme, which I think, well, I know many people agree, others don't, but that's the purpose of discussing this.
Right. Well, and I think this is the thing that I really resonate with, the principle that society and economy exist for humans, for us, not us for it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think, we want to shift back to. At least I know I do.
Agree.
Yes.
Totally agree.
Well, we appreciate all of you being here with us. Hope you enjoyed our episode today. Check this book out, Eric Fromm, The Sane Society. That's what we're discussing, season 2. Appreciate you being here with us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll see you next time on the Rethinking Humanity podcast.
Bye, guys.
Bye.